Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. Lecture 3: The Conception of God and the Meaning of Prayer. Further, it is the nature of the self to maintain itself as a self. For this purpose, it seeks knowledge, self-multiplication and power, or in the words of the Quran, the kingdom that never faileth. The first episode in the Quranic legend relates to the man's desire of knowledge. The second, to his desire for self-multiplication and power. In connection with the first episode, it is necessary to point out two things. Firstly, the episode is mentioned immediately after the verses describing Adam's superiority over the angels in remembering and reproducing the names of things. The purpose of these verses, as I have shown before, is to bring out the conceptual character of human knowledge. Secondly, Madame Blavatsky, who possessed a remarkable knowledge of ancient symbolism, tells us in her book called The Secret Doctrine that with the ancients, the tree was a cryptic symbol for occult knowledge. Adam was forbidden to taste the fruit of this tree, obviously because his finitude as a self, his self-equipment and his intellectual faculties were, on the whole, attuned to a different type of knowledge. That is, the type of knowledge which necessitates the toil of the patient observation, admits only of slow accumulation. Satan, however, persuaded him to eat the forbidden fruit of occult knowledge, and Adam yielded, not because he was elementally wicked, but because, being hasty, ajal, by nature he sought a shortcut to knowledge. The only way to the correct his tendency was to place him in an environment which, however painful, was better suited to the unfolding of his intellectual faculties. Thus, Adam's insertion into a painful physical environment was not meant as a punishment. It was meant rather to defeat the object of Satan, who, as an enemy of man, diplomatically tried to keep him ignorant of the joy of perpetual growth and expansion. But the life of a finite ego in an obstructing environment depends on the perpetual expansion of knowledge based on actual experience. And the experience of a finite ego to whom several possibilities are open expands only by method of trial and error. Therefore, error, which may be described as a kind of intellectual evil, is an indispensable factor in the building up of experience. The second episode of the Quranic legend is as follows. But Satan whispered him, Adam, said he, O Adam, shall I show you the tree of eternity and the kingdom that faileth not? And they both ate thereof, and their nakedness appeared to them, and they began to sew of the leaves of the garden to cover them. And Adam disobeyed his Lord and went astray. Afterwards, his Lord chose him for himself and was tuned towards him and guided him. 120 to 122. The central idea here is to suggest life's irresistible desire for a lasting dominion and infinite career as a concrete individual. As a temporal being, fearing the termination of its career by death, the only course open to it is to achieve a kind of collective immorality by self-multiplication. The eating of forbidden fruit of the tree of eternity is life's resort of sex differentiation by which it multiplies itself with a view to circumvent total extinction. It is as if life says to death, if you sweep away one generation of living things, I will produce another. The Quran rejects the phallic symbolism of ancient art, but suggests original sexual act by the birth of the sense of shame, disclosed in Adam's anxiety to cover the nakedness of his body. Now, to live is to possess a definite outline, a concrete individuality. It is in the concrete individuality manifested in the countless varieties of living forms that the ultimate ego reveals the infinite wealth of his being. Yet the emergence and multiplication of individualities, each fixing its gaze on the revelation of its own possibilities and seeking its own dominion, inevitably brings in its wake the awful struggle of ages. Descend ye as enemies of one another, says the Quran. This mutual conflict of opposing individualities is the world pain which both illuminates and darkens the temporal career of life. In the case of man, in whom individuality deepens into personality, opening up possibilities of wrongdoing, the sense of the tragedy of life becomes much more acute. But the acceptance of selfhood as a form of life involves the acceptance of all the imperfections that flow from the finitude of selfhood. The Quran represents man as having accepted at his peril the trust of personality which the heavens, the earth, and the mountains refused to bear. Verily, we proposed to the heavens and to the earth and to the mountains to receive the trust, but they refused the burden, and they feared to receive it. Man undertook to bear it, but hath proved unjust, senseless. 33:72. Shall we then say no or yes to the trust of personality with all its attendant ills? True, manhood according to Quran consists in patience under ills and hardships. At the present stage of the evolution of selfhood, however, we cannot understand the full import of the discipline which the driving power of pain brings. Perhaps it hardens the self against a possible dissolution. But in asking the above question, we are passing the boundaries of pure thought. This is the point where faith in the eventual triumph of goodness emerges as a religious doctrine. God is equal to his purpose, but most men know it not. 12:21. I have explained now to you how it is possible philosophically to justify the Islamic conception of God. But as I have said before, religious ambition soars higher than the ambition of philosophy. Religion is not satisfied with mere conception. It seeks a more intimate knowledge of and association with the object of its pursuit. The agency through which this association is achieved is the act of worship or prayer ending in spiritual illumination. The act of worship, however, affects different varieties of consciousness differently. In the case of prophetic consciousness, it is in the main creative. That is, it tends to create a fresh ethical world wherein the prophet, so to speak, applies the pragmatic text to his revelations. I shall further develop this point in my lecture on the meaning of Muslim culture. In the case of the mystic consciousness, it is in the main cognitive. It is from this cognitive point of view that I will try to discover the meaning of prayer. And this point of view is perfectly justifiable in the view of the ultimate motive of prayer. I would draw your attention to the following passage from the great American psychologist, Professor William James. It seems too probable that, in spite of all that science may do to the contrary, men will continue to pray to the end of time, unless their mental nature changes in a manner which nothing we know should lead us to expect. The impulse to pray is a necessary consequence of the fact that, whilst the innermost of the empirical self of man is a self of the social sort, it yet can find its only adequate socius, its great companion in an ideal world. Most men either continually or occasionally carry a reference to it in their breast. The humblest outcast on this earth can feel himself to be real and valid by means of this higher recognition. And on the other hand, for most of us, a world with no such inner refuge when the outer social self failed and dropped from us, would be the abyss of horror. I say, for most of us, because it is probable that individuals differ a good deal in the degree in which they are haunted by this sense of an ideal spectator. It is much more essential part of the consciousness of some men than of others. Those who have the most of it are possibly the most religious men. But I am sure that even those who say they are altogether without it deceive themselves and really have it in some degree. Thus, you will see that psychologically speaking, prayer is instinctive in its origin. The act of prayer, as aiming at knowledge, resembles reflection. Yet, prayer at its highest is much more than abstract reflection. Like reflection, it too is a process of assimilation. But the assimilative process in the case of prayer draws itself closely together and thereby acquires a power unknown to pure thought. In thought, the mind observes and follows the working of reality. In the act of prayer, it gives up its career as a seeker of slow footed universality and rises higher than thought to capture reality itself with a view to become a conscious participator in its life. There is nothing mystical about it. Prayer, as a means of spiritual illumination, is a normal, vital act by which the little island of our personality suddenly discovers the situation in a larger whole of life. Do not think I am talking of autosuggestion. Autosuggestion has nothing to do with the opening up of the sources of life that lie in the depths of the human ego. Unlike spiritual illumination, which brings fresh power by shaping human personality, it leaves no permanent life effects behind. Nor am I speaking of some occult and special way of knowledge. All that I mean is to fix your attention on a real human experience which has a history behind it and a future before it. Mysticism has, no doubt, revealed fresh regions of the self by making a special study of this experience. Its literature is illuminating, yet its set physiology, shaped by the thought forms of a worn out metaphysics, has rather a deadening effect on the modern mind. The quest after a nameless nothing, as disclosed in Neoplatonic mysticism, be it Christian or Muslim, cannot satisfy the modern mind which, with its habits of concrete thinking, demands a concrete living experience of God. And the history of the race that shows that the attitude of the mind embodied in the act of worship is a condition for such an experience. In fact, prayer must be regarded as a necessary complement to the intellectual activity of the observer of nature. The scientific observation of nature keeps us in close contact with the behavior of reality and thus sharpens our inner perception for a deeper vision of it. I cannot help quoting here a beautiful passage from the mystic poet Rumi, in which he describes the mystic quest after reality. The Sufi's book is not composed of ink and letters. It is not but a heart white as snow. The scholar's possession is pen marks. What is Sufi's possession? Footmarks. The Sufi stalks the game like a hunter. He sees the musk deer's track and follows the footprints. For some, while the track of the deer is the proper clue for him, but afterwards it is the musk gland of the deer that is his guide. To go one stage guided by the scent of the musk gland is better than 100 stages of following the track and roaming about. The truth is that all search for knowledge is essentially a form of prayer. The scientific observer of nature is a kind of mystic seeker in the act of prayer, although at present he follows only the footprints of the musk deer and thus modestly limits the method of his quest. His thirst for knowledge is eventually sure to lead him to the point where the scent of the musk gland is a better guide than the footprints of the deer. This alone will add to his power over nature and give him the vision of the total infinite which philosophy seeks but cannot find. Vision without power does bring moral elevation but cannot give a lasting culture. Power without vision tends to become destructive and inhuman. Both must combine for the spiritual expansion of humanity. The real object of the prayer, however, is better achieved when the act of prayer becomes congregational. The spirit of all true prayer is social. Even the hermit abandons the society of men in hope of finding, in a solitary abode, the fellowship of God. A congregation is an association of men who, animated by the same aspiration, concentrate themselves on a single object and open up their inner selves to the working of a single impulse. It is a psychological truth that association multiplies the normal man's power of perception, deepens his emotion, and dynamizes his will to a degree unknown to him in the privacy of his individuality. Indeed, regarded as a psychological phenomenon, prayer is still a mystery, for psychology has not yet discovered the laws relating to the enhancement of human sensibility in a state of association. With Islam, however, this socialization of spiritual illumination through associative prayer is a special point of interest. As we pass from the daily congregational prayer to the annual ceremony round the central mosque of Makkah, you can see how the Islamic institution of worship gradually enlarges the sphere of human association. Prayer, then, whether individual or associative, is an expression of man's inner yearning for a response in the awful silence of the universe. It is a unique process of discovery whereby the searching ego affirms itself in the very moment of self negation and thus discovers its own worth and justification as a dynamic factor in the life of the universe. True to the psychology of mental attitude in prayer, the form of worship in Islam symbolizes both affirmation and negation. Yet, in view of the fact borne out by the experience of the race that prayer as an inner act has found expression in a variety of forms, the Quran says, "To every people we have appointed ways of worship, which they observe. Therefore, let them not dispute this matter with thee, but bid them to thy Lord, for thou art on the right way. But if they debate with thee, then say, God best knoweth what ye do. He will judge between you on the day of resurrection as to the matters wherein ye differ." 22:67 to 69. The form of prayer ought not to become a matter of dispute. Which side you turn your face is certainly not essential to the spirit of the prayer. The Quran is perfectly clear on this point. The east and the west is God's. Therefore, whichever way ye turn, there is the face of God. 2:115. There is no piety in turning your faces towards the east or the west, but he is pious who believeth in God and the last day, and the angels and the scriptures and the prophets, who, for the love of God, disperseth his wealth to his kindred, and to the orphans and the needy, and the wayfarer, and those who ask, and for ransoming, who observeth prayer, and payeth the legal alms, and who is of those who are faithful to their engagement when they have engaged in them, and patient under ills and hardships, in time of trouble. Those are they who are just, and those are they who fear the Lord. 2:177. Yet we cannot ignore the important consideration that the posture of the body is a real factor in determining the attitude of the mind. The choice of one particular direction in Islamic worship is meant to secure the unity of the feeling in the congregation, and its form is in general creates and fosters the sense of social equality in as much as it tends to destroy the feeling of rank or race superiority in the worshippers. What a tremendous spiritual revolution will take place! Practically, in no time, if the proud aristocratic Brahman of the South India is daily made to stand shoulder to shoulder with the untouchable. From the unity of the all inclusive ego who creates and sustains all egos follows the essential unity of all mankind. The division of mankind into races, nations, and tribes, according to the Quran, is for purposes of identification only. The Islamic form of association in prayer, therefore, besides its cognitive value, is further indicative of the aspiration to realize this essential unity of mankind as a fact in life by demolishing all barriers which stand between man and man.